Oops. I can't even with that show. Hi. Coach MK. Pull this up and we'll get started. Yay! Okay, it looks like we're on. Hi, it's Coach MK. I am speaking directly to my unicorn crew right now. I got some questions about training paces versus racing paces, and I'm going to try to clear that up a little bit, and I'm probably going to fail, but we're going to make a good college try. So, the other day, because I know you never miss a single stream I do. The other day we talked a little bit about the marathon, and we said that, you've got distance over time, and effectively effort level as measured by heart rate over time. So we could put effort and pace on the y-axis, and then time and distance on the x-axis, right? So more work, more effort, longer time, longer distance, all right? And then the name of the game in an endurance event is to have, or at least we want to find one steady pace-ish. And that's a dotted line because it's not perfect. You're not a robot. You're not a machine. Yay! Robot overloads are coming. That today is not that day. So it'll be more like a little squiggly line, but you guys spin out too much about that. So we're not going to go there. What that does to have one steady, relatively consistent pace output that doesn't really change over time or over the full distance of your race, right? Your heart rate is going to start somewhere like here, like 130, and it's going to steadily, over time, end up here at like 175. So if you go back to that demonstration I did after I ran the Philadelphia Marathon, and I talked through analyzing my output in Polar and in Strava, I had one relatively consistent effort level. It wasn't this exact mile splits like 825, 825, 825, 825. Nothing ever works out that way. They were a lot messier than that, but it ended up being an incredibly even effort over time, and my heart rate started at 130 and it ended around 175. This basic paradigm with a few tweaks is what an endurance effort should look like. Everybody worries about training to a pace, and that's really the wrong way to look at it, in my opinion. What we need to be doing is figuring out kind of like which paces are too fast and finding that effort that will yield a continuous steady output that we can sustain over time without needing to slow down. Because there's nothing worse in a marathon, or at least there's nothing more demoralizing to the people that I've worked with, to have, pace being really like steady, walk. Right? So what we want is to have the steady without needing to walk, and in order to do that, for the longer the event, we might have to lower your pace. But what is not going to ever happen is that you're so fit that your heart rate is consistent the whole way through. It doesn't work that way. Over time, your body is going to have to work harder to sustain a given pace output. So, if for those of you just joining the stream, hello everyone. I'm talking through kind of the basics of like racing versus training paces. So what happens is people are like, oh, my last marathon I had to walk, so I think I need more hill work, more race pace miles. My body needs to really get to know the pace. And I'm like, I would argue that your body really needs to get to know the effort level, because if this is what happened, then this pace was not your marathon race pace. This was too fast, right? That might have been appropriate for a half. If you made it all the way to the 20 mile marker, great, that was a 20-mile race pace. Yay, you raced a 20-miler and then walked 5K, walked a 10K. But we really might need to ratchet things back to get the output that we want towards the end. So I know that's kind of trying to visualize what we do want, what we don't want. So how does that translate into heart rate zones? Generally, broadly and generally speaking, before I go on to the next visual, I want to stay with this graph here for a second and say, if this was the halfway point, let's say this is literally the halfway point in the race. So half of the effort would be here, and the other half would be here. Okay, I can divide by 2. That's great. I'm so glad you can do very basic things. But what the point I'm trying to make is that understanding that the average heart rate in a well-executed marathon is going to be in the bands that I'm about to show you. And let's say this average number works out to be around 159. That was mine for Philadelphia. Now, most of the time my heart rate was lower. A lot of the time my heart rate was higher. That's why mathematical averages don't tell you very much. And that's why they're not statistically useful. At the same time, that's also why I keep that average number running, visible on my wristwatch, and I really start paying attention to it in hours 2, 3, and 4. What is my current heart rate? Am I above or below my average heart rate? And is that all right? Like, where do I stand relative to the amount of time and I expect to be out there, and the amount of distance I expect to cover? So your heart rate is not going to be like at a steady 130 all the way through. Then that means you underperformed. You're not going to be able to sustain it at 175 for a full 3 hours, much less 4. So to that effect, we want to have that one steady output. That's what you guys want, and then that makes that slow, gradual increase of heart rate so you kind of hit that point where you can't run anymore and you're totally spent. And the longer that you're out there, generally speaking, for a marathon, it'll be somewhere between 175 and 180. Right? So with the average around 159. With that in your mind, understand that this is where we talk. Hi, you want to help me? Are we going to talk about range? Or are you just going to spill things? Coach Violet is here. And I think she's about to get busy. Hi, Coach Violet. Yeah, yes. Right? Sorry, she's about to say something important. Hi. Hi. All right, so the range. We start at 130-ish. We end at 180-ish. So that's a range of around 50 beats. Now again, don't go crazy with the math here. I'm just trying to illustrate a point. Right, so that's about 50 beats. You got to spread out over time and over that distance. Thank you, Boo Boo. Yay! Oh, I know. Thank you. I'll try to make this quick. So we're not going to be training to a wider range. There are lots of different ways to look at this, and I would encourage you just to be let's keep it as simple as possible, because I'm already spinning some people out with math right now. The most important thing to understand is for a marathon, because it's a longer distance and you're going to have more time on both sides, it's a lower heart rate average, right? If your average heart rate was higher for a marathon, chances are pretty darn good that you had to walk for a big portion of it. And I know that none of my runners want to walk during a marathon because I have to hear about it all the time. So then that comes out to training paces and training efforts versus racing paces and racing efforts. Okay. Broadly and generally speaking, what I just drew is the situation you want in every single race you ever do. One steady pace all the way through. Heart rate, it starts off low, ends up high, because that's what racing is. I'll make this a little bit bigger. Okay. Now we're getting into it. Let me get one more color before I go further. Or 3 more colors. Come on, just grab all the colors. All the colors. All right, so in a racing situation, you know you have everything here and below. 140 is easy effort. Okay, let's back up. If we were to look at most people, like, remember I've said before, we don't have a good predictive figure or a data point that tells us, okay, you can spend 2.5 hours above 170 and you can spend 20 minutes. We just don't know. It's a function of experience, a function of training, a function of dedication, a function of fitness, a function of how much sleep you had the night before. It can vary from day to day. But broadly and generally speaking, back when I was at my fittest, I knew I could last 2 to 2.5 hours between 170 and 174 and still have a 20-minute kick at the end. So that's a pretty high heart rate, and that's also unusual. Most humans, above 180, I mean, realistically, you got 20 minutes. That means in this area of the triangle, you got about 20 minutes. And that's all. That's all. Even if you're super well trained, that's all you're going to get out of that effort level. And we have data to back this up. I'm not just making these numbers up. In this area, got about 40. And that's if you're on fire and you're running like on pure adrenaline. In this area, it's a bit more time than that. 60 to 90 minutes, in some cases 2 hours. In this area, we've got 2 to 3 hours. And then down here is the theoretical. Easy effort, you could do this all day long. I mean, not literally, just ask any of my unicorns. But yeah, theoretically, anything below 150, and 150 is pushing it. Like, that does not mean, oh, does this mean 150, does it mean 140? No, none of that. Don't start that nonsense with me. We need to stay fully below 150. Most humans, that metabolic ceiling past which they're starting to burn glucose, is below, well below 150, and we're more likely to be below it at 140, and so that's why I use this as a cap for training on your easy effort days. But when it comes to racing, remember the graph I just drew, and I said that my average for that marathon was a 159. Okay? So a well-executed marathon, if you think that marathon is going to take you less than 5 or 6 hours to complete, then this is really where your average needs to be over time. So when your heart rate is too high in the beginning, like, you need to slow down. If your heart rate can be low at the end, I don't really care, but if it's too high in the beginning, you're probably making a bet that your legs can't cash 2 hours from now. So when I think about all of this, and I try to put it into context, I called this zone the marathon zone. And that does not mean you have to keep your heart rate in this band for the duration of a marathon. It just means that the average over time needs to fall right in there. For this, half, and again, this is very theoretical. Up here, 10K, and I know that sounds aggressive. Up here is 5K. 5Ks are horrible. Remember, I've told you 5Ks and 10Ks are horrible and horrifying and terrible, and I can't stand them. So this is another reason why, again, this gives you kind of a visualization. When I say that easy effort, your 10K pace is 2 minutes per mile faster than your easy effort pace, we're jumping up 2 bands. So that we use as a training pace. Okay. When we're racing, it's a little bit of a different beast, and we can let the cap out a little bit more. For a 5K, it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 3 ranges above. Okay. You have permission to get into the 180s for a 5K, but the chances of you being able to hold it if you think that 5K is going to take longer than 20 minutes are pretty low. So this is, again, the aggregate and the average. If your heart rate average for a 5K came out to 182, I would be like, boy, you was working hard. You probably did that right. If your heart rate average for a 10K came out to be 178, I would have been like, whoa, that was terrible. Congratulations, you nailed it. If your average heart rate for a half, where you didn't have to walk, came out to 168, I'd probably be like, you did that right too. And then we'd go back through and we'd look and we'd talk about it. And the same for a marathon. If your average was below 160 and you didn't have to walk, again, if you were fully trained for it, chances are you nailed that marathon. This is why we do the EAT. This is why we did the EAT. Isn't it good to know if you can't last 10 minutes in this band, wouldn't you rather know it before race day rather than counting on having to do it at the end of a really long race? You know, I think that's good information to have. We had people that are treating it like a test and they had failed it and being like, that hurt, therefore I'm weak, and that's was never intended to be the point. 5Ks hurt, 10Ks hurt. I don't care how fit you are. We have quotes from Steph Ruth Rothstein talking about how terrible 5Ks are. There's a whole back and forth with someone I coach, one of the elites I coach, on the Coach MK Facebook page, talking about how much 5Ks suck, and I'm like, I don't do them, and she's like, but you recover so much faster than from marathons. I'm like, but you run marathons, Rebecca, I love you, but Jesus. But broadly and generally speaking, this is kind of what we're looking at, and this is one way to start thinking about average effort over time, and that's what these bands look like. You are never going to train yourself to be able to sustain a higher heart rate for a longer period. That's the wrong way to look at it. We want to get stronger and more efficient so that harder amounts of effort generate faster paces, or that the paces that you want your race pace to be, it takes less effort to generate and sustain that pace over time. That is literally the definition of distance. So, let's talk about the 10K. So Julie asked me a question about 10K race pace. The mistake is in thinking that every minute of that 10K needs to be spent in this band. If I was advising a runner that was about to start a 10K, I would say the first mile, the first kilometer of that 10K, if your heart rate is above 165, you've probably gone out too fast. Because remember, we want our average to be here. So we're going to start in this band around 168. The end of the race, we're going to be working really hard. It'll probably be 182. So your average will be in here. In a marathon, you're probably going to start out here. And you're going to finish pretty close to the top of here. So your average will be right here on this line. So think about that. And again, in an ultra, we're going to start way down here. We're probably not even going to get up here just because we're going to be tired. 24-hour races. Thanks, Susan. Happy birthday to you. And then the average will probably fall out somewhere in here as well over time. Okay? So I don't know if that clears anything up at all, but there seems to be a fixation on, okay, so if I'm between 161 and 168, that's 10K pace, right? And I'm like, well, it can be. That's where it should be in the first kilometer of a 10K. But if you didn't push harder than that during the 10K, I'd say you didn't race it well enough. Or if you couldn't go harder, then we need to talk about power output and training a little bit differently and a little bit better for the 10K, right? If in a marathon, your heart rate it starts off in this zone, I would be like, woof, you do not have a lot of room to maneuver before we've topped out. Does that make sense at all? Is this helping at all? Julie, if you're here, say something, please. Yay. Susan, if you're here, say something, please. I'm just trying to give you like a visual representation of what we want to be thinking about over time. So don't be bound to this band for execution on race day. Coach Sarah's. Okay, thanks. Oh, Coach Sarah's going to give us some 2 cents. Yay, your 2 cents is always wanted. Thanks, Melissa. I'm glad you found this helpful. So it's not about like staying in this range for the duration. It's about like making sure that you start below and end above so that your average is in here for the event. And this will be coming, I'm going to put this into a pretty little format later with the help of probably, pretty Mr. Patrick, as I like to call him, because that's not condescending at all. Let's get a picture of that. Okay. So, for your question, Julie, about the 10K, you would want to start here around 168. We would finish around somewhere around 183 and average out there. When it comes to a training pace, though, we just really want to jump it up really quickly because we want your heart rate to skyrocket into that zone by the final rep. So if you get there on the first rep, fine, it's just going to really inhibit your recovery. But over time, you'll see that your heart rate does not spike quite as highly in the first interval, and comes down a lot faster over time. So it'll look sort of like, first it's a little wave up, quick fall, and then woo, and that's usually kind of what the heart rate chart looks like. It's like quick, hard recover, but you don't recover all the way back down to the baseline. So you're not recovering completely before the next interval takes off when we're going that hard, and that is that whole idea of what happens in this magic area that has been, overemphasized, overstated, and its importance over-exaggerated. That's the lactate buffering magic that everyone thinks is going to turn their heart, all of a sudden make a 5-minute average pace in the marathon possible. What if your nerves put you 150 before you started the race? That's a good question. That's where the breathing techniques, and I know I talk about it a lot and it sounds really esoteric, but matching the breathing to the footfalls and really getting into a good meditation will get your central nervous system under control. It will also get the cortisol output under control, and that's why that stuff is so important. And I know it sounds hokey, like meditate. Blah, I've seen Eat, Pray, Love. I'm never doing that shit. Okay, fine. But the more we can slip into a meditative state when we really care about performance, the better, the more control we're going to have over all of this happening, and the closer we're going to come to reaching our potential. Because if you don't think those elite professional athletes aren't losing their mind, remember at the Rio Olympics, Michael Phelps was sitting and giving the stink face with the big noise canceling headphones on right before his whatever you call it in swimming meet. Before it was his turn, right? That was the meditation. That was getting everything under control so that all of his energy could be devoted to, beating everybody, power output in the water. So we don't have to train exactly like the pros. We don't have to be perfect. But if we want better, and better is something that really matters to us, then we got to get that breathing phenomenon and our central nervous system and our nervousness under control. So it'll never go away. But when you realize that it's starting to build up and so is your heart rate too, taking deep breaths can sort of quash all of that wasted energy as we go. Race blind, yeah. Don't try to do this math during the race. But that's one of the reasons why I really like training the way that we do in fitness protection, which, as you know, looks a whole lot like the monthlies that used to exist. It's about we're going to find 10K pace over and over and over and over and over again. And then the next month we're going to hit 5K pace over and over and over and over and over again, because this is the process of learning effort levels. This is the process of learning to run by feel. And it's not about strict numbers, because as you get stronger, those paces change. And the difference between a 2:15 and a 2:45, it can come down to how lucky you are with the weather. By the way, my athlete Rebecca that ran a 3:03 yesterday, let me tell you how not happy she was with that. We were trained for much, much faster. A 3:03 was the best she was able to do with the weather and the humidity that caused her to dehydrate at a much more rapid rate than usual and get side stitches. So no matter how fast you are, it'll never be fast enough. And imagine being disappointed with a 3:03. I know it's hard to do, and it's easy to be like, Rebecca's really spoiled. She's so lucky. Rebecca's done a lot of hard work. Rebecca has made a lot of really hard choices, and Rebecca was not dealt a very good card yesterday. So there's going to be a lot going into making sure Rebecca is good to go for the rest of the year, because it's I'm a 3:03 runner. No, you're not. You are much faster than that. Conditions just wouldn't allow it to come out on the day. So I'm just going back and through reading all your notes. This things not a good idea of success. But with training, we're definitely lacking racing experience. No, 5K pace is terrible. All right, I'm gonna have to go get my kids. I just wanted to point this out, Julie, Sarah. If you could shoot this to the rest, Coach Sarah, if you could send this to the rest of the unicorns while I go pick the kids up, and then I'm headed to a strength session that I'm going to be streaming on Instagram, or at least streaming a few minutes of it on Instagram. As you can see, like the thing that made my legs shake all weekend long, I'm about to get to go do it again. Yay, I love it. See, that's the reward. When you're strong enough to do more work, that's what you get. More work. Yay, me. I've dreamed of this all year long. Got to make up for that here in bed. But I hope this helps a little bit in understanding. It's not about like, don't get out of your lane, but rather start in this lane and in this lane, and you'll nail your marathon. But don't be too eager to get to work harder than you have to at any given point in time. Yay! Yes, the post on FPP. And if you guys that are still watching, we have a Strava group now. If you want to join the Strava group, go on in. I'm interested to see how people use it. The only way I've ever used Strava was to find, sort of like online training buddies to give virtual pats on the back when I needed it, and I don't really use it that often. But all my runs auto upload. So anyway, if it's something we need to develop, I'm open to that. But if it's something we can just have to facilitate more community between you guys, that's the best possible outcome, because got a lot going on. Either way, you're coached, you're loved. I'll see you guys later.